Bernard, how do you define millennial and Gen Zs, and what do you believe makes them unique in terms of their attitudes towards money?
It is the eternal question, where do generations start and finish? The baby boomers were easy to define because they started 9 months after the end of the Second World War. The millennial generation, in my view, start in the early to mid 1980s and go through to about the year 2000. And the way I would define them is that they are the children of the baby boomer generation. So my kids are millennials, of course, and that's the generation in their 20s and 30s at the moment, forming households and upgrading their homes and so forth. The Generation Z or Generation Z, I would put at effectively people born from the year 2000 up to today, so it's 20 odd years or so. And conceptually, I would argue that they are the children of Generation X, in fact. So the generation that followed the baby boomers. And their characteristics are, the Generation Z or Generation Z, their characteristics are, I think that that they are driven not so much by financial measures. I think that they are driven by the pursuit of meaning. And by that, I mean that are they investing in something? Are they doing something? Are they working in an organisation that makes a contribution, a positive contribution to the planet, to society? That pursuit of meaning, I think, really defines Generation Z or Z. All of this, of course, does prompt another question. What is the generation that lies beyond Generation Z? And I know my good friend Mark McCrindle has come up with Generation Alpha. He has switched alphabets to the Greek alphabet. So there's plenty of scope for the generations to continue with Mark's definition of the next generation beyond the Zs.
So Bernard, why are the millennial and Gen Z generations important to the finance industry, and how should the finance industry consider including them?
Well, in fact, if you look at the income earning capacity of the average Australian, or imagine the average American or whatever, there's a very defined pattern. You tend to peak in terms of your income earning capacity around your early 30s and then continue through to the mid 50s, for example. It's about 25 years of peak income earning capacity. And for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, in fact, it's the baby boomers in Generation X that has passed through that 30 to 55 stage of the life cycle. And if you're a retailer or a fast-moving consumer goods manufacturer or a financial service provider or a government looking for votes, then you kind of focus on those generations. But sitting behind them, of course, are the next generations, the millennials, and also the Generation Zs or Zs. So by focusing on that generation, you're really establishing a relationship with, a conversation with, a narrative, understanding the mind, the mood, the preferences, if you like, of that next generation. And the argument is that each generation is slightly different. The generation that went through the Great Depression, for example, were frugal for the rest of their lives, regardless of their prosperity. They were shaped by those events. And I suspect that the Generation Z or Z and the millennials, to some extent, will be shaped by the pandemic. I think, whether in fact they'll be obsessively washing their hands for generations into the future, it's a positive outcome, I suppose. But I think there is a focus on security, on home, community, family, meaning. In other words, a lot of the frippery of society that had dominated, say, the last 10 years or so, the whole Instagramming food and traveling and look at me kind of society, I think is going to shift, more subdued, more family, more tribal, more communal, more focused on repairing the damage, focused on climate change issues, making a contribution to society. These are the things that I think are going to motivate the next generation. And I have to say, I agree with them. They're, to my way of thinking, they're very much on the right track.
Bernard, you mentioned the importance of purpose, security, tribal and community. and really meaning before when discussing millennials and Gen Zs. If you were a company looking to appeal to millennials and Gen Zs, what factors would you consider in your approach?
Well, I think that there's a series of approaches that all companies should adopt in the 2020s, and I think that they are going to particularly resonate with that next generation of consumers, investors, of customers, if you like, and that is be authentic, be to communicate well. To do what you say you will do, to behave responsibly, to behave ethically. In fact, there's any number of examples where there have been missteps, quite serious missteps over the last 5 or 6 years or so, and I'm not going to cite all of those. But I think the next generation has a very high standard of how they expect their commercial relationships, their business relationships, their employer and employee kind of relationships to evolve. So I would say that governance, diversity, inclusion, ethics, yes, you need to be profitable, all of those kind of things. But that being profitable is kind of like, that's business as usual. We kind of expect that. There is another level expected, I think, in the post-COVID world, and that is authenticity, transparency, and people doing what they say they will do. That to me is really where businesses need to focus in order to attract and connect with the next generations.